I gave birth alone while my husband ignored my calls to hang out with his sister. Turns out she wasn't his sister. Now he doesn't even know where my daughter and I live. My husband, Alexander, always had an oddly close relationship with his so-called sister, Amelia. During our 4 years together, he would cancel dates to spend time with her, sleep over at her place, even share a bed with her, and call her romantic pet names. I never saw it as a deal-breaker, though. His whole family had supposedly died in a tragic car crash when he was in his 20s, and I figured that losing his entire family might have made him cling to his only remaining relative. Besides, he was Italian, and I thought this kind of close-knit family bond was just part of his culture. But Amelia always seemed to have a problem with me. Like one time when they came back from dinner, I noticed she was wearing my diamond necklace. When I brought it up trying to sound casual, she just smirked and said, "Oh, I figured you wouldn't mind. It clearly looks better on me anyway." Another time, she even started a fight between us by telling Alexander she'd seen me flirting with another guy. What was the flirting? I told a guy on the street his shoelaces were untied. I often felt like the third wheel when the three of us hung out, but I brushed it off. After all, she was his sister, and I wanted my daughter to have a close relationship with her aunt. Family first, right? Then one day my water broke. I was alone at home, and when I called Alexander, he texted back, "With Amelia, can't talk right now, just text." I replied, telling him I was about to go into labor. No response. When I tried calling for an ambulance, I got put on hold. So there I was about to give birth, driving myself to the hospital. My mom was the only one there to hold my hand and comfort me. Complications during the birth kept me in the hospital overnight. But Alexander didn't even show up until the next morning. "Good morning, my love. I'm so sorry I missed your text," was all he said as he picked up our baby girl and spun her around the room. I was still fragile and emotional, so I let it go, thinking maybe I was just being too sensitive. And for a while he was the perfect husband and father. He brought me heating pads before I even asked, sang lullabies to our baby, and rubbed my swollen feet every night. But old habits die hard, and it wasn't long before he started spending all his time with Amelia again. One particularly lonely day, I packed up the baby and went to visit an elderly neighbor. This woman had lived in our town her whole life and knew everyone. As I vented about how I felt pushed aside, Amelia's name came up. The moment I mentioned her, the old lady's face went pale, and she gripped the table. "That's not his sister," she said, her voice shaking. "Amelia is my coworker's daughter. She doesn't have any siblings." It felt like someone had kicked me in the chest. Suddenly all the odd behavior, the long hugs, the inside jokes, the constant tickling made horrifying sense. I called my mom, sobbing, and she just said, "I'm on my way." When she arrived, she started packing his things without even asking for details. That night, when Alexander came home, he found all his stuff in garbage bags by the door. I confronted him. He didn't even try to deny it, just looked sad that he'd been caught. "Babe, she's just a friend," he said. I slapped him. "You're never coming near me or our daughter again. Get the hell out of my life." He just smirked. My mom shoved him away from me and told him to leave. As he walked out, I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. But things only got worse from there. When I went back to the neighbor's house, she told me Alexander's family hadn't died in any accident. His mom was alive, and he still had contact with 3 aunts, 2 uncles, and several cousins. My grief quickly turned into a seething rage. How could he lie about his entire life? Who pretends their family is dead? Who pretends their girlfriend is their sister? I knew I wouldn't get any real answers from Alexander, so I started digging. First, I looked at our wedding photos. There were these cousins Alexander had introduced as distant relatives from his mom's side, the ones who supposedly survived the accident. I found one of them on Facebook, sent him a message, and asked how he knew Alexander. Turns out this guy wasn't a distant cousin. He was Alexander's actual brother, the one he claimed died in the car accident. The guy sounded puzzled by my questions, but eventually told me Alexander had 5 siblings, all of them very much alive. My stomach dropped. Who makes up a lie like that? Who pretends their siblings are dead? What kind of person does that? I called my best friend Harper and spilled everything. She came over as fast as she could, armed with a bottle of wine and her laptop. "All right, we're going full detective mode," she announced, setting up at my kitchen table. While my mom took care of the baby, Harper and I dove into Alexander's real life. We found his mom's Facebook profile pretty quickly. She posted all the usual mom things, pictures of her garden, book club gatherings, and family parties. But Alexander wasn't in any of the photos. Not a single one. Just her and her other kids, celebrating birthdays and holidays together. "This is seriously twisted," Harper said, scrolling through years of family pictures. "It's like he erased himself from his own family and made up this tragic backstory." I nodded, still trying to process it. But why? Why would anyone do that? We kept digging and eventually found Alexander's old high school yearbook photos online. There he was, looking a little younger but with that same charming smile that had completely fooled me. And right there in the cheerleading squad photo was Amelia. They weren't in the same grade, she was a year older, but it was clear they'd known each other since high school. So they've known each other since they were teenagers, I muttered, feeling another wave of betrayal. He told me they met in college. Harper reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry, girl. This is beyond messed up. The next day, I made a fake Instagram account and followed Amelia. Her profile was public and I scrolled back years through her posts. There were dozens of photos of her and Alexander together, dating back at least 5 years. In the older ones, before I came into the picture, the captions said things like, "Date night with my love," and "For years with this handsome man." But then around the time Alexander and I started dating, the captions changed to things like, "Sibling time," and "Brother-sister day out." They had literally rewritten their entire relationship history once he met me. Instead of breaking up, they chose to create this elaborate lie about being siblings. I felt physically sick. I showed my mom, who had been quietly supportive through all of this. She looked at the photos and just shook her head. "You need to talk to a lawyer," she said firmly. "This isn't just about a breakup. You need to protect yourself and your baby." She was right. The next morning, I called a lawyer named Michelle. She specialized in family law and had this no-nonsense vibe I immediately appreciated. I told her everything, showing her the mountain of evidence we'd gathered. She listened without interrupting, taking careful notes. "This is certainly unusual," she said when I finished. "But unfortunately, being a liar isn't illegal. Being a terrible person doesn't automatically help in separation proceedings." I felt a wave of frustration. "So he just gets away with it?" "Not necessarily," Michelle said, leaning forward. "We need to focus on what actually matters legally, custody of your daughter and the division of your assets. Has he tried to contact you about the baby?" Surprisingly, he hadn't. It had been nearly a week and Alexander had reached out once. It was like he'd vanished from our lives entirely. "That's actually good for us," Michelle said, adjusting her glasses. "It shows a lack of interest in parenting. Keep a record of everything, every missed call, every day he doesn't ask about his child. It will help us build a strong case for primary custody." I left Michelle's office feeling a little more in control. I had a plan at least. But that control slipped the moment I got home. There was a massive bouquet of flowers on my doorstep with a card from Alexander. "I miss my girls. Let's talk." No apology. No acknowledgement of his lies. Just, "Let's talk," like we'd had a minor disagreement. I tossed the flowers straight into the trash, took a picture of them sitting there, and sent it to him without a caption. He called me immediately, but I let it ring out. Instead, I texted him, "All communication goes through my lawyer from now on." Then I blocked his number. That night, as I was feeding the baby, there was a knock at the door. I peeked through the peephole and saw Amelia standing there, looking nervous. I didn't open the door. "I know you're in there," she called out. "We need to talk about this." "It's not what you think." I actually laughed to myself. "Not what I think. What else could it possibly be?" "Go away, or I'm calling the police," I shouted through the door. "You're overreacting," she shot back, her voice taking on that condescending tone I'd come to despise. "Alexander and I have a complicated history, but we're not together anymore. We haven't been since he met you." I didn't respond. I just pulled out my phone and started recording in case she said something I could use later. "The sister thing was just easier," she went on, clearly frustrated by my silence. "His family is really messed up. They basically disowned him. The car accident thing was... I don't know. It was just easier than explaining the real situation." I still didn't respond. "Fine," she huffed. "Be that way. But you should know Alexander is devastated. He loves that baby and he's not just going to walk away." After she left, I called Michelle and told her about the visit. She suggested I file for a temporary restraining order, just to be safe. If they've kept up a lie this complex for years, who knows what else they're capable of, she pointed out. The next day, I went to the courthouse and filed the paperwork. I felt a bit silly doing it. Alexander had never been physically violent with me, but the emotional manipulation was real, and I was genuinely scared of what he might do next. Turns out, I was right to be worried. That weekend, I woke up to find my car vandalized. All 4 tires were slashed. There was no note, no obvious evidence of who did it, but I had a pretty good idea. I called the police who came and took a report, but they didn't seem too concerned. "Probably just random vandalism," one of the officers said with a shrug. I knew better. I installed security cameras that day. And those cameras paid off sooner than I expected. The one he'd claimed died in the car accident. The guy hesitated at first, clearly thrown off by my questions, but eventually admitted that Alexander actually had 5 siblings, all of them alive and well. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. Who lies about their own siblings being dead? What kind of person does that? I immediately called my best friend, Harper, and poured out the whole twisted story. She showed up at my place in record time, armed with a bottle of wine and her laptop. "All right, time to put on our detective hats," she said, setting up at the kitchen table. With my mom keeping an eye on the baby, Harper and I started digging into Alexander's real life. It didn't take long to find his mom's Facebook profile. She posted the usual stuff, pictures of her garden, snapshots from book club meetings, family gatherings, but not a single mention of Alexander. There were countless photos of her surrounded by her kids at family parties, birthdays, and holidays, but he wasn't in any of them. "This is seriously disturbing," Harper muttered as she clicked through the endless stream of family photos. It's like he just erased himself from his own family and made up this tragic backstory to replace them. I just sat there trying to wrap my head around it. Why would someone cut themselves out of their entire family like that? We kept digging and eventually stumbled across some old high school yearbook photos. There he was, looking a little younger but with that same disarming smile that had completely fooled me. And standing right beside him in one of the cheerleading squad pictures was Amelia. They weren't in the same grade, she was a year ahead, but it was obvious they'd known each other since their teenage years. So they've known each other since high school, I said, feeling another wave of betrayal hit me. He told me they met in college. Harper reached over and gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. I'm so sorry, girl. This is beyond messed up. The next morning, I created a fake Instagram account and followed Amelia. Her profile was public and I spent the better part of an hour scrolling through years of her posts. Dozens of photos with Alexander, some dating back at least 5 years. In the older ones, from before I came into the picture, the captions said things like, "Date night with my love," and "For years with this handsome man." But then right around the time Alexander and I started dating, the captions shifted to "Sibling time" and "Brother-sister day out." They had literally rewritten their relationship history to fit their lie. Instead of just breaking up, they went to the insane lengths of pretending to be siblings. I felt my stomach turn. I showed the posts to my mom, who had been quietly supportive through all of this. She just shook her head. "You need to talk to a lawyer," she said firmly. "This isn't just a breakup. You need to protect yourself and the baby." She was right. The next morning, I found a family lawyer named Michelle. She had this no-nonsense attitude I liked right away. I laid out everything, the lies, the fake family stories, the mountain of evidence. She listened carefully, jotting down notes as I talked. "This is definitely unusual," she said when I finished. "But unfortunately, being a compulsive liar isn't a crime. There's no special treatment for just being a terrible person in family court." I felt a fresh wave of frustration. "So he just gets to walk away from all this?" "Not necessarily," Michelle replied, leaning forward. "What we need to focus on is what actually matters legally, custody of your daughter and dividing your assets. Has he tried to reach out about the baby?" Strangely, he hadn't. It had been nearly a week, and Alexander hadn't tried to call, text, or visit. It was like he'd disappeared from our lives entirely. "That's actually in your favor," Michelle pointed out. "It shows a lack of interest in parenting, which can help us build a stronger case for primary custody. Keep a record of every day he doesn't reach out. It'll matter in court." I left Michelle's office feeling a little more in control, like I finally had a plan. But that sense of control didn't last long. When I got home, I found a huge bouquet of flowers on my doorstep. The card attached read, "I miss my girls. Let's talk." No apology. No acknowledgement of his lies. Just a casual "let's talk." Like we'd had some minor misunderstanding. I tossed the flowers straight into the trash, took a picture of them sitting there, and sent it to him without a caption. He called me immediately, but I let it ring out. Instead, I texted, "All communication goes through my lawyer from now on." Then I blocked his number. Later that night, as I was feeding the baby, there was a loud knock at the door. I peeked through the peephole and saw Amelia standing there looking nervous. I didn't open the door. "I know you're in there," she called out. "We need to talk." "It's not what you think." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Not what I think. What else could it possibly be?" "Go away or I'm calling the police," I shouted through the door. "You're overreacting," she shot back, her voice dripping with that same condescension I'd come to expect from her. "Alexander and I have a complicated history, but we're not together anymore. We haven't been since he met you." I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone and hit record, just in case she said something useful. "The whole sister thing was just easier," she continued, clearly annoyed by my silence. "His family is really messed up. They basically disowned him. The car accident thing. I don't know, it just felt simpler than explaining the real story." I still said nothing. "Fine," she finally huffed. "Be that way. But you should know Alexander is heartbroken. He loves that baby, and he's not just going to walk away." After she left, I called Michelle and told her about the visit. She suggested I file for a temporary restraining order just to be safe. "If they've been lying this intensely for years, who knows what else they're capable of," she warned. The next day, I went down to the courthouse and filed the paperwork. I felt a bit ridiculous doing it. Alexander had never been physically violent with me, but the psychological manipulation was real, and I genuinely feared what he might try next. Turns out I was right to be worried. That weekend, I woke up to find my car vandalized. All 4 tires slashed. There was no note, no obvious evidence of who did it, but I had a pretty good idea. I called the police, who came and took a report, but they didn't seem too interested. "Probably just random vandalism," one of the officers said with a shrug, but I knew better. I installed security cameras that day, and those cameras paid off sooner than I expected. "Not because I disowned him," Patricia said, her voice tight with a mix of frustration and sadness. "I'm sure that's what he told you, but the truth is, he cut us all off when we tried to talk to him about his relationship with Amelia." I frowned, trying to piece this new version of Alexander together. "What kind of concern?" I asked cautiously. Patricia took a deep breath. Amelia has always had a strange, almost obsessive attachment to Alexander. They dated back in high school, and at first it seemed like any other intense teenage romance. I felt a chill run down my spine. Another girlfriend I'd never heard about. Patricia continued, her fingers nervously tapping the side of her coffee cup. They broke up when they went to different colleges, and for a while Alexander started seeing a nice girl named Brooke. They were together for almost 2 years. I felt my stomach drop. Yet another piece of his life he had hidden from me. But then Amelia transferred to his college. Patricia went on, her eyes growing distant as she relived the past. Within a month, Alexander had ended things with Brooke and was back with Amelia. That's when things got strange. Patricia paused, choosing her next words carefully. Amelia didn't want him spending time with us. She'd call him constantly when he was visiting home, and if he didn't pick up right away, she'd show up at our house unannounced. She took a long, slow sip of her coffee. We tried to talk to him about it. We were worried that the relationship was becoming controlling, maybe even toxic. But when we brought it up, he exploded. Accused us of trying to ruin his life, said we never accepted Amelia, that we were the problem. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. That was the last real conversation we had. He stopped coming to family gatherings, then stopped returning our calls, and eventually blocked all of our numbers. I sat there trying to process this new darker side of Alexander. How many versions of this man had I married without realizing it? The last time I heard from him, Patricia continued, her voice catching slightly, was a text saying he was getting married. He didn't invite any of us to the wedding. I only found out I had a granddaughter through a Facebook post one of his cousins saw. I felt a strange, conflicted wave of sympathy for this woman, cut off from her own son and kept in the dark about her only grandchild. But I also felt a sharp pang of suspicion. Was this just another layer of manipulation? Why are you telling me this now? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Because I'm worried, Patricia said, leaning in closer. Worried about you and the baby. Amelia is not stable and Alexander, he enables her. They bring out the worst in each other. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder, sliding it across the table to me. These are copies of police reports and restraining orders from when Alexander and Amelia were together before. His ex-girlfriend, Brooke, filed multiple harassment complaints against them. They would show up at her work, call her at all hours, spread rumors. It got so bad, she had to move to another state. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were copies of police reports, restraining orders, and even screenshots of disturbing emails from both Alexander and Amelia to this Brooke. Patricia explained that her lawyer had kept these files from the original cases and had shared them with her when she explained my situation. It felt like staring into a twisted mirror, seeing my own nightmare played out in someone else's life. Thank you for this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. This is exactly what I need for my case. Patricia gave a small, sad nod. I want to help, she said softly, her eyes glistening. And maybe, if you're comfortable, I'd like to meet my granddaughter someday. I promised I would think about it. As we stood up to leave, Patricia grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly firm. Be careful, she warned, her eyes locked on mine. They won't give up easily. She was right. When I got back to the Airbnb, I found my mom in a panic. Someone called the property owner, she said, her face pale with worry. They claimed to be you and said we needed to check out early due to a family emergency. The owner came by to make sure everything was okay, and I had to convince him it wasn't true. My heart dropped. They had found us. I didn't know how, but they had. We packed up immediately and checked into a hotel under my mom's name. I called Michelle and filled her in on everything, the meeting with Patricia, the new evidence, the latest harassment. This is exactly what we need, Michelle said, her voice sounding both relieved and determined. With these old police reports, we can make a strong case that Alexander is a danger to you and your daughter. I'll file for an emergency custody hearing. The hearing was set for the following week, and in the meantime, I felt like a prisoner of my own fear. I jumped at every shadow, checked every car that passed by, and never went anywhere alone. My mom and Harper took turns staying with me, making sure I was never alone for long. The night before the hearing, my phone buzzed with an email from Alexander. I know where you are at Red. We need to talk before you do something you'll regret. Meet me at the park near your hotel tomorrow at 9 a.m. I forwarded the email to Michelle immediately. She called the police, who promised to increase patrols around my hotel, but admitted there wasn't much they could do since the message wasn't an outright threat. I barely slept that night, holding my baby close and straining to hear every creak and whisper in the dark. When morning came, I felt exhausted but determined. I wasn't going to meet Alexander. I was going to court to make sure he could never threaten me or my daughter again. Michelle met us at the courthouse early. She had a thick stack of evidence ready: the social media harassment, the slashed tires, the broken window, the police reports from Brooke, statements from Mrs. Thompson and Patricia. As we sat in the waiting area, I watched the doors anxiously. Then I saw them. Alexander and Amelia walked in together, his arm around her waist like nothing had changed. Alexander actually had the nerve to look me in the eye and give a little wave like we were old friends. Amelia just stared at me with icy hatred, her arm possessively linked through his. I took a deep breath as the judge called our case. This was it. The moment of truth. I clutched the thick folder of evidence in my hands as I walked into the courtroom, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. This was my chance to protect my daughter and reclaim my life, and I wasn't about to let fear stop me. The judge, an older man named Judge Matthews, had a no-nonsense vibe. He adjusted his reading glasses as he glanced between me and Alexander, his eyes narrowing as if trying to gauge who was telling the truth. Michelle had coached me well: stay calm, stick to the facts, don't let him rattle you. But that was easier said than done when the man who had shattered my world was sitting just a few feet away, smirking like he had already won. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and laid it all out. The fake sister lie, the fabricated tragedy about his dead family, the relentless harassment after I discovered the truth. I presented the security footage, the police reports, the screenshots, everything. My voice only broke once when I recounted driving myself to the hospital while in labor. That part seemed to catch Judge Matthews' attention. He looked up from his notes, his expression hardening. When it was Alexander's turn, his lawyer tried to paint me as paranoid and emotionally unstable. He claimed that Alexander and Amelia were just extremely close friends with a complicated but ultimately innocent history. He even tried to spin their sibling act as some bizarre attempt to simplify things for me, as if that made any sense. Then Alexander took the stand and the performance began. He put on his best heartbroken father act, his voice trembling as he talked about how much he missed our daughter and how I was cruelly keeping him from her. He even managed to force a few tears, which nearly made me laugh out loud if I hadn't been so furious. I dug my nails into my palms, forcing myself to stay silent. But then it was Michelle's turn to cross-examine, and things took a sharp turn. She started off slow, asking Alexander basic questions about his family, his mother's name, his siblings' birthdays, simple stuff. He answered confidently, probably thinking this was a cakewalk. Then Michelle pulled out the folder Patricia had given me. "Mr. Alexander," she began, her tone cool and sharp, "you testified that your mother disowned you 4 years ago, correct?" "Yes, that's right," he replied, his voice steady. Michelle adjusted her glasses and held up a brightly colored birthday card. "Then how do you explain this card your mother sent you last year? The one you responded to with a text thanking her?" Alexander's face drained of color. Michelle took a deliberate step closer, her heels clicking against the polished courtroom floor. "I have here copies of text messages between you and your mother, provided by your mother herself. Messages that prove you've been in regular contact with her much more recently than you claimed." Alexander stammered, his eyes darting toward his lawyer, but Michelle didn't give him a chance to recover. "And you testified under oath that you and Amelia were just friends when you met your wife, correct?" "Yes, we had dated years before, but..." "Then how do you explain these social media posts from just a few months before you met your wife?" Michelle said, sliding several printed screenshots across the table. They showed Alexander and Amelia looking very much like a couple, romantic captions, intimate photos, clear evidence of a relationship. Alexander's jaw clenched. He tried to spin another lie, but Michelle was relentless. She kept coming at him, each question more pointed than the last, unraveling his carefully constructed narrative piece by piece. By the end he was sweating, his responses growing more erratic and contradictory. Judge Matthews scribbled furiously in his notes, his face turning stonier with each passing minute. Then it was Amelia's turn to testify, and things got even messier. She couldn't keep her story straight for more than a few sentences. First, she claimed they were just friends when Alexander met me. Then she admitted they'd been dating, but broke up when he met me. Moments later, she backtracked again, claiming they never really broke up, just had a complicated relationship. It was a disaster. Then Michelle dropped the real bombshell. She called Patricia as a surprise witness. Alexander's face when his very much alive mother walked into the courtroom was a sight to behold. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, which in a way he had, given he had told me she was dead. Patricia testified about the years of toxic behavior she had witnessed between Alexander and Amelia. She described how they had harassed his ex-girlfriend Brooke to the point that she had to leave the state, bringing with her copies of police reports, restraining orders, and even a few heartbreaking emails from Brooke herself. It was overwhelming, irrefutable evidence that Alexander and Amelia's twisted behavior wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment, but a long-standing pattern of manipulation and abuse. After a brief recess, Judge Matthews returned, his face grim. "The court finds the respondent's behavior concerning and potentially dangerous," he announced, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom. "The pattern of deception and harassment indicates an unstable situation that is not in the best interest of the child." He granted me full custody of my daughter, allowing Alexander only supervised visitation once a month. He also extended the restraining order against both Alexander and Amelia for a full year, with the option to renew. I nearly collapsed with relief. Michelle gave my hand a supportive squeeze under the table, and I heard my mom let out a small, relieved sob behind me. As we were leaving the courthouse, Alexander tried to approach me, but a bailiff stepped in his path. "Don't think this is over," he hissed at me as they led him away. Those words haunted me for days. I found myself double-checking the locks on my doors, jumping at every creak in the floorboards, flinching at every unknown number that appeared on my phone screen. Michelle assured me that the restraining order had teeth, that if Alexander or Amelia came near me again, they would be arrested immediately. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. And I was right. About a week after the hearing, my phone rang. It was Child Protective Services. Someone had reported me for neglect and unsafe living conditions. The CPS worker who came to inspect my apartment seemed almost apologetic. She glanced around my clean, well-organized home and at my healthy, smiling daughter and clearly felt awkward for even being there. "I'm sorry about this," she said, jotting a few notes on her clipboard. "We sometimes get false reports during custody disputes. It's not uncommon." I forced a smile, but inside I was seething. This wasn't just a custody dispute. This was a calculated attack on my life. Then a few days later, my boss called me into his office. Someone had emailed the company, accusing me of stealing from clients. The claims were completely baseless, and thankfully my boss knew me well enough not to believe them, but it was still humiliating to have to defend myself against outright lies. The final straw came one evening when my neighbor knocked on my door. "Hey, just thought you should know," she said, looking a bit uncomfortable. "Someone's been asking around about you. Said they were an old friend trying to reconnect, but the description sounded a lot like that woman I've seen hanging around your building before." "Amelia." It had to be. I called Michelle in a panic. "They're not stopping," I said, my voice shaking. "The restraining order isn't working." "Document everything," she replied firmly. "Every call, every false report, every sighting. We'll go back to court if we need to." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Alexander's last words to me. "Don't think this is over." Maybe it never would be over. Maybe I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to strike again. The thought was suffocating. The next morning, I made a decision. I called my mom and asked if her offer to let me stay with her for a while still stood. It did. Then I called my boss and explained the situation. He was surprisingly supportive, especially after I laid out the full story, and agreed to let me work remotely permanently. Within a week, I had packed up my essentials, said a quiet goodbye to the life I had tried to rebuild, and moved in with my mom 2 hours away. It wasn't running away, I told myself. It was a strategic retreat, a fresh start somewhere they wouldn't think to look for us. The first few months were rough. Every unknown number made my heart race. Every creak of the floorboards at night set my nerves on edge. But slowly, life settled into a new normal. My daughter started crawling, then walking. I found a little house to rent not far from my mom's place. I made a few new friends, people who knew nothing about my past. Michelle kept me updated on the legal situation. Alexander had tried to contest the custody arrangement, claiming he had changed and deserved more time with his daughter. The judge denied his request, pointing to the continued harassment as clear evidence that nothing had changed. About 6 months after we moved, I got an unexpected call from Patricia. She asked if she could visit to meet her granddaughter. I hesitated, but she had helped me so much that I agreed. She came for a weekend and it was surprisingly nice. She brought old photo albums, flipping through them as she told me stories about Alexander's childhood. Sweet, innocent memories that made it hard to reconcile the boy in the pictures with the man I had married. "He wasn't always like this," she said one afternoon as we watched my daughter toddle around the living room. "Amelia brought out something dark in him. Or maybe it was always there and she just gave him permission to embrace it." Patricia started visiting regularly after that. She never mentioned where we were to Alexander, and I grew to trust her. My daughter loved her, Grammy, and Patricia became a part of our little, rebuilt family. Life went on. I even started dating again, though cautiously. I ran background checks on anyone I met and took things painfully slow. Trust didn't come easily anymore. Then, about a year and a half after we moved, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know where you are." My blood ran cold. I immediately called Michelle, then the local police. They took my report but admitted there wasn't much they could do about a single text message. I changed the locks, installed new security cameras, and tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, a prank, maybe even a wrong number. A week passed without any further contact. Then I got an email from Patricia asking if she could visit that weekend. She mentioned she had some important news to share. When she arrived, she looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes and her usual warm smile replaced with a tight, worried line. We waited until my daughter was napping before she sat me down at the kitchen table. "Alexander and Amelia broke up," she said, her voice low and tense. I felt a jolt of surprise. "It was messy," she continued. "She's been telling people he mistreated her, and he's been calling her crazy. They're both dragging each other's names through the mud." I felt a twisted sense of relief. Maybe this would finally take the pressure off me. But Patricia wasn't finished. "There's more," she said, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for her cup of coffee. "Alexander was arrested last week. He showed up at Amelia's place drunk and caused a scene." My heart skipped a beat. I had no idea if this was the beginning of the end or just the start of a whole new nightmare. She had a new boyfriend there, and Alexander lost it. He broke some windows, threatened the guy, and ended up getting arrested for property damage and making threats. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what Patricia was telling me. "So that text I got, probably from Amelia?" I said, my pulse quickening. Patricia nodded, her expression grim. "She's been telling anyone who will listen that Alexander ruined her life, and now she's out for revenge against anyone connected to him, including you." Fantastic. I had escaped one stalker only to potentially gain another. I called Michelle that afternoon and forwarded her the text, adding it to our ever-growing file. She suggested we might be able to get a restraining order against Amelia as well, given the circumstances. The next few weeks were tense. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Amelia to show up or for something awful to happen, but nothing did. Patricia kept me updated on the fallout. Alexander had pled guilty to lesser charges and ended up with probation, mandatory anger management classes, and a restraining order from his new ex. Amelia, it seemed, had shifted her focus, now directing her rage at Alexander and his latest girlfriend, leaving me thankfully out of her crosshairs. Slowly, I allowed myself to breathe again. My daughter turned 2, then 3. She started speaking in full sentences, a bright, happy kid with no memory of the chaos that had once surrounded us. I got promoted at work, found a steady rhythm in my new town, and even started dating again. I met a kind, straightforward guy named Matthew, an elementary school teacher who made the best pancakes on Sunday mornings. He had a calming presence, the kind that made you feel safe just being around him. Patricia continued to visit regularly, and our relationship deepened into a genuine, supportive friendship. She was the one who told me when Alexander finally moved out of state for a new job. "I think it's good for him," she said one afternoon, watching my daughter chase fireflies in the yard. A fresh start, away from Amelia and all the old baggage. I agreed, though I made sure Michelle filed the necessary paperwork to maintain our custody arrangement across state lines. I wasn't taking any chances. It's been 5 years now since that chaotic courtroom showdown. My daughter is starting kindergarten next month. Matthew and I got married last year in a small, intimate ceremony, just close friends and family. Patricia was there, beaming as she watched her granddaughter toss flower petals down the aisle. Alexander still has his monthly supervised visits, though he only bothers to show up for about half of them. He's remarried too, to someone he met at his new job. According to Patricia, the distance from Amelia has done him some good. He seems more stable, more grounded. We'll never be friends, but we can at least be civil for our daughter's sake. As for Amelia, I haven't heard a whisper about her in years. Last I heard, she moved to Florida, chasing some vague dream of acting or modeling. Good riddance. Sometimes I still can't believe how much my life has changed, how one conversation with a neighbor completely shattered the illusion I have been living in. If Mrs. Thompson hadn't told me the truth that day, I might still be there, trapped in a web of lies, feeling like a third wheel in my own marriage. Instead, I'm here in this peaceful little town, with my daughter and my husband, building a life that feels real and honest. It wasn't an easy road. There were plenty of moments when I felt like giving up, when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. But that's the thing about lies, they eventually fall apart. The truth always finds its way out, one way or another. And when it does, you have a choice. You can either crumble under the weight of those lies, or you can build something new, something better on the foundation of truth. I'm glad I chose the latter.